Let me take you back to a small village tucked away in the heart of Osun State, Nigeria, a place called Ifewara. Life there was simple and hard. The kind of place where families counted rent before planting, and every meal was a miracle. In this humble village, in the year 1942, a child was born, a tiny boy named Enoch Adejare Adeboye. They had no riches. In fact, they barely had enough to eat. His family lived in a mud house, with thatched roofing and cracked walls that welcomed both sun and rain. This young boy grew up barefoot, running through red earth, playing with sticks, and dreaming, not of tours or travels, but of just going to school. His parents couldn't afford shoes, let alone a pencil. But in that boy's heart, God had planted a seed, a quiet spark. He may not have known what destiny looked like, but destiny knew his name. He was just a boy, but the heavens had already begun writing a mighty story. There comes a time in every story when sacrifice enters the picture. For little Enoch, that moment came when he wanted to go to school. The family had nothing, no savings, no salary, not even a bicycle to sell. But his father, determined to give his son a future, looked around and saw the only valuable possession they had, their goats. One goat. That was it. Their meat, their milk, their pride. But his father tied that goat with trembling hands, led it to the market, and sold it, just to pay for Enoch's school fees. My brother, which parent does that without love? That single act changed the course of Enoch's life. From that moment, he knew, if my family can sacrifice this much for my education, I will not fail them. So off he went, with no bag, no shoes, just a chalk slate, a torn book, and an unshakable determination to succeed. A dusty village classroom, wooden benches, a blackboard stained with chalk dust, windows without shutters, the kind of place where lessons are written with broken chalk and remembered with hunger. Yet in the midst of it all, young Enoch sits quietly, eyes wide open, heart fully present. While some students fidget or whisper, he is focused. Every word the teacher utters enters his ears like scripture. And even though he walks long distances each day to attend school, through narrow bush paths and morning dew, he never complains. His classmates might laugh at his bare feet, but Enoch doesn't mind. Because he sees what others cannot, that education is his ticket out of poverty. In that humble classroom, greatness was silently being formed. Letter by letter, number by number. Years passed. The boy who once studied by lantern light had now become a young man with a secondary school certificate in his hand. That graduation day, it wasn't a big party, no loudspeakers or music. Just claps, proud smiles, and the smell of hope in the air. He wore a clean shirt, ironed with a charcoal stove. His shoes, borrowed from a neighbor. But his smile, that was his own, bright and unshakable. His parents stood watching from the crowd, eyes full of tears. They had sold their goods. Now they were harvesting glory. That certificate was more than paper. It was proof that anything is possible, even for a barefoot boy from Ifewara. One day, a letter arrived, folded in thick brown paper, sealed and smudged with ink. It was from the University of Nigeria, Nsukka. Enoch opened it with trembling fingers, and there it was: admission granted. His joy, uncontainable. His mother danced. He packed a few shirts into a faded school bag, hugged his parents, and boarded a rickety lorry to Nsukka. The road was long and bumpy, but he stared out the window with fire in his eyes. He was going to university, not just for himself, but for everyone who believed in him. At university, Enoch was no ordinary student. While others rushed to parties or chased empty things, he chased knowledge. Every morning, he'd be in the front row, notebook open, pen ready, eyes sharp. Hydrodynamics, algebra, mechanics, subjects that made many sweat, he handled with ease. Professors paused when he spoke. Some even gave him space on the board to solve problems his classmates could not attempt. He didn't just study for grades. He studied to lift his family out of lack. To prove that poverty was not a prison. When the Nigerian Civil War came and disrupted Nsukka, he didn't give up. He pressed on and eventually completed his studies at the University of Lagos, graduating with distinction. That young boy who once studied under kerosene lights was now a university graduate, on his way to becoming a scientist, a lecturer, and soon, a voice to generations. Even a man of numbers needs a woman of peace. And for Enoch, that woman was Foluke Adeboye, graceful, gentle, and full of faith. They met at a time when love was not about wealth, but about trust and shared dreams. Enoch had no car, no mansion, no luxury to offer. But he had vision. And Foluke, she saw it clearly. Their wedding was simple, no luxury gowns, no exotic cakes, but it was blessed. Two hearts became one, and they began a journey not just of marriage, but of purpose. The first tough times. There were days without food and nights when the children fell sick and there was no money for medicine. But Foluke stood by him, praying, cooking, encouraging, never complaining. She wasn't just a wife. She was a pillar, the unsung hero beside the man that would one day be called Daddy Gio. Dr. Enoch Adeboye, that's what the university called him. A brilliant mind, now standing before young students, chalk in hand, neatly talked. He taught with passion. His lectures were clear, engaging, and full of depth. Students loved him. They saw more than a teacher, they saw a mentor. But even with the success, something was missing. Inside him, a quiet voice whispered, there is more. He had achieved what many dreamed of: respect, salary, position. Yet deep within, there was a hunger not even academic success could satisfy. That hunger was spiritual. It began with a crisis. One of his children was terribly ill, hospitals failed, medication did nothing. Someone whispered, go to the Redeemed Church, they pray there. Desperate, Enoch took his child and walked into a small, unimpressive church building. There was no air conditioning, no fancy choir, just simple people, singing simple songs, and a man called Akindayomi, preaching the truth of Jesus Christ. That year, something happened in Enoch's heart. He didn't understand it all, but he felt it. That tug, that call. He heard about salvation, and responded. The man of science knelt and became a man of faith. His daughter was healed, but more than that, his soul was awakened. He didn't just visit that church again, he became a part of it. Soon after his conversion, the church saw something in Enoch. Though quiet, his mind was sharp, and his spirit sincere. Because Pa Akindayomi only preached in Yoruba, they asked Enoch to interpret in English. And oh, how he interpreted! With passion, fire, and clarity. The man who once lectured equations was now delivering eternal truth. But he didn't stop there. He cleaned chairs before service. He shared tracts in the streets. He swept the floor. He prayed long into the night. God was preparing him, not just to serve, but to lead. The scientist was becoming a soldier of the cross. The voice once reserved for lecture halls now echoed through pulpits. The 1970s. Lagos was still slow-paced, the air smelled of dust and kola nuts, and buses had wooden floors. In a humble neighborhood, the Redeemed Christian Church of God sat quietly, no cathedral, no crowd, just a small gathering under a corrugated roof, plastic chairs, and lanterns for light during vigils. This was where Enoch began to grow in spirit, not in title, but in obedience. He didn't rush to preach. He served, cleaned the church, sat at the feet of Papa Akindayomi, a man who couldn't speak English but spoke the language of heaven with clarity. Enoch would translate his messages from Yoruba to English, but what the people didn't know was that God was also translating Enoch's destiny behind the scenes. Pa Akindayomi was aging, and the church was growing. Yet, he said nothing of who would lead after him. But God had already whispered it, quietly, secretly. Unknown to Enoch, a letter had been written, long before the old man died. Inside it, the name of the next leader was penned, Enoch Adejare Adeboye. But at this time, Enoch was still a lecturer. He never imagined himself as a general overseer. He was just helping, translating, and occasionally teaching. Yet, heaven was orchestrating a shift. And while others fought for attention and titles, Enoch was hidden, being prepared in silence. Came the moment of decision. The church began to sense something. The old man called a few elders together, quietly, carefully, and then they brought out the letter. Written years ago, signed by Pa Akindayomi. It read, when I am gone, the person to succeed me shall be Enoch Adejare Adeboye. The room was silent. Enoch's heart pounded. He didn't jump. He didn't smile. In fact, he wept. He wasn't looking for leadership. He wasn't ambitious. He was simply a man chasing God. What heaven had called, and when God calls, you cannot hide. That night Enoch walked the streets alone, thinking, praying, wrestling with fear. "Lord, how can I lead this ministry?" And the Lord answered, "Because I have chosen you." In 1980, the trumpet of eternity sounded. Pastor Akindayomi, the founder of RCCG, breathed his last. The man who once walked barefoot to villages to preach was now being welcomed into glory. The church wept. All of Lagos wept. The cloud of mourning hung heavy. But through the grief, I began to look to one man, Enoch. The boy from Ifewara, the interpreter, the reluctant preacher, the chosen successor. He stood at the funeral not as a lecturer, not as an academic, but as a son stepping into a spiritual legacy. The mantle had fallen. The time had come. As the elders gathered, the sealed letter was opened in public. Gasps, silence, then whispers, then understanding. The name was clear, Enoch Adeboye. Some were shocked, some doubted, others nodded in agreement. But God was not confused. He does not call the qualified, He qualifies the called. And so, with trembling hands and a surrendered heart, Enoch accepted. He turned to his wife, Mama Foluke, who stood strong by his side, and they prayed. Not for fame, not for power, but for grace to lead. 1981. A new chapter began. Pastor Enoch Adeboye was officially ordained as General Overseer of the Redeemed Christian Church of God. The church was still small, just about 40 parishes. No headquarters, no media, no television, but what they had was enough prayer, fasting, and faith. And in the middle of it, stood a humble man, fasting for days, sleeping on the floor, asking God for one thing: let your church grow. And oh, how it did. This was not the end. It was the beginning. From Ifewara to the world. From a God sacrifice to a global movement. The Redeemed Christian Church of God began to grow, from Lagos to London, from one country to over 190 nations. But Pastor Adeboye never changed. Still fasting, still praying, still working humbly with God. He gave all glory to the Lord. And everywhere he went, he said, if God can use me, He can use anyone. And that is the power of purpose, obedience, and grace.